The sun was setting over the small town, casting long shadows across the streets. The air was thick with the scent of dust and the hum of distant conversations, a typical evening in the town where the poor and rich lived side by side, but never truly mixed. Among the bustling crowd was a young woman named Clara. She was well-dressed, her outfit perfectly tailored to her slender frame. A purse hung from her arm, and her heels clicked sharply against the cobblestone road as she walked with an air of confidence. She was used to being the center of attention, and nothing seemed to faze her. She had always believed that the world revolved around her. After all, she had inherited her wealth, her family's influence, and the respect that came with her status. To Clara, those who weren't as fortunate were just unfortunate. She didn't think much of them. And certainly, she never expected her path to cross with one of them today. As she rounded the corner, she saw him. John, the poor man she had noticed standing near a makeshift stall selling handmade trinkets and old books. His clothes were worn and faded, his hands rough from hard labor. He didn't fit the polished image of the world Clara had grown up in, and she made no effort to hide her disdain. "Look at you," Clara muttered under her breath, loud enough for John to hear. "A poor soul selling trinkets, like that's going to change your life." John, who had been quietly arranging the items on his stall, didn't respond immediately. He had become accustomed to people like her, those who looked down on him for his humble background, for the simple life he led. It didn't bother him anymore, not really. But today, something about the tone of her voice made him pause. Clara took a step closer, her gaze sweeping over the assortment of items on the stall. "Do you actually think anyone would buy this junk? It's embarrassing, really. You're wasting your time, don't you see that?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. John finally lifted his head and met her gaze. His expression was calm, his eyes not betraying any anger or frustration, though it was clear that he had heard these words too many times before. "I'm just trying to make a living, miss," he said quietly, his voice steady. Clara let out a short laugh, as though his words were amusing. "A living? You mean barely surviving? It's pathetic. You're never going to get anywhere in life with this kind of attitude." John's lips tightened slightly, but he remained silent. He had learned long ago that arguing with people like Clara was a waste of time. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, shifting a few books on the table in front of him. He was used to these encounters, and though they stung, he had learned to carry on regardless. Clara, however, wasn't done. She enjoyed the feeling of superiority that came from looking down on others, and she wasn't about to let him off that easily. "Tell me, what do you even dream of?" she asked, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Do you even know what it's like to have real goals, real ambition? You wouldn't know how to get there. You're just stuck in this little world of yours." For a moment, John looked at her, his gaze softening just slightly. "Everyone has their own way of living," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I may not have the same things as you, but I don't envy you for them." Clara's eyes widened with disbelief. How dare he suggest that he didn't envy her? Didn't he see what she had? The wealth, the status, the freedom to do whatever she pleased. Didn't he long for that kind of life? Envy. Who would want to be like you? She shot back, her voice sharper now. "You live a pitiful existence, and that's your choice. It's sad really, but I guess some people just don't know any better." John shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of people like her who believed that their wealth somehow made them better. But he knew that getting into a fight with Clara wouldn't change anything. It would only fuel her arrogance. So he turned away, starting to pack up his things for the evening. But Clara wasn't finished. She took a few more steps toward him, her heels clicking on the pavement, each step purposeful and deliberate. "You should just give up," she said, her tone no longer playful but serious. "People like you, they don't change their circumstances. They stay stuck, always. John stopped what he was doing and turned to face her again, this time his expression more focused. He could see the arrogance in her eyes, the belief that everything she had, everything she took for granted, was owed to her. He didn't argue. Instead, he simply said, "Everyone's life is their own to live. Miss, maybe one day you'll realize that it's not about what you have, but who you are." Clara stared at him, stunned for a moment by the quiet strength in his words. But before she could respond, a sudden loud sound shook the air, an explosion in the distance. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air was filled with the sound of sirens and distant shouting. A few people nearby screamed and scattered, running for cover. Clara's heart raced in her chest. She had no idea what was happening, but it was clear that the chaos was heading in their direction. The distant sound of gunfire started to reach her ears, and the reality of the situation hit her like a cold wave. John didn't hesitate. Without a word, he grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a nearby alleyway. The woman yanked her arm back, still in shock. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. She looked back over her shoulder, panic setting in as the sounds of the battle grew closer. "You're not safe out here," John said, his grip firm as he guided her into the shadows. "Follow me." For a moment, Clara was too stunned to move, but as another explosion rattled the ground, she realized that John was the only one who seemed to know what to do. His movements were quick and efficient, while people around them were running in all directions, desperately trying to find shelter. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, still confused and frightened, though a new understanding was starting to form in her mind. John didn't answer right away. He was focused on getting them to safety, scanning the area to make sure no one was following. He didn't say anything about the words she had spoken earlier. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Clara, who had just moments ago been dismissive of him, now found herself relying on him for her survival. It was a strange and humbling feeling, and she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of awe at the way he moved, calm, collected, and determined. She had underestimated him in every way possible. As they reached a nearby building, John stopped, looking around once more before pulling her inside. Clara, her heart still racing, realized that in this moment, it wasn't her wealth, her beauty, or her status that mattered. It was survival. And in this moment, it was the poor man, the one she had belittled, who was saving her life. But this was just the beginning. The real test of courage was yet to come. And Clara would soon learn that in the heat of battle, the true strength of a person could not be measured by wealth, but by the heart. The moment they stepped into the alley, the air seemed to thicken with tension. The sudden noise of gunfire grew louder, and Clara could feel her heart pounding against her chest. She tried to steady her breath, but the sounds of explosions, the screech of sirens, and the frantic shouts of people in the distance made it impossible. She clung to John's arm, half in fear, half in disbelief. John moved quickly, his steps deliberate and steady, as if he had been through this many times before. He led her through the alley, keeping his head low, scanning every corner for signs of danger. The woman, who had always thought of herself as self-sufficient and in control of every situation, suddenly found herself completely dependent on this man she had so arrogantly dismissed just moments ago. "Stay close," John muttered, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. His eyes were sharp, constantly darting from one direction to the next, taking in every detail of the street ahead. "We need to get to cover. It's not safe here." Clara opened her mouth to speak but hesitated. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to ask why he was helping her, why someone like him was risking his life for her. But the words didn't come. Instead, she just followed, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and awe. The further they went, the closer they were to the heart of the chaos. They could hear shouting in the distance, followed by more gunfire, followed by an earth-shattering explosion that rattled the walls of the alley. Clara flinched, her heart racing as dust and debris rained down around them. She ducked instinctively, her breath catching in her throat. John didn't even flinch. He moved forward, pulling Clara with him, urging her to keep pace. The alley was narrow, and the shadows grew deeper as they moved further into the urban maze. They reached a corner, and John signaled for Clara to stop. He crouched down, peering around the edge of the building with practiced caution. Clara felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck. The sounds of the firefight were so close now that she could almost feel the heat of the explosions, the shockwaves rippling through the air. She looked around nervously, trying to make sense of the chaos. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice a little too loud, breaking through the tense silence. John didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to her with a sharp gaze. "It's a firefight. Gunmen, military. You need to stay quiet and keep moving," he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. He wasn't worried about himself. He had seen this before, but he could see the fear in Clara's eyes, and it struck him. She was still too sheltered, too removed from the reality of what was going on around her. John took a step back, motioning for her to follow him as he turned the corner. They were now in the midst of the city's ruins, half-destroyed buildings, abandoned vehicles, and smoke-filled streets. The distant rumble of tanks and the crack of gunfire was deafening. The once bustling city was now a war zone, a place where survival was the only thing that mattered. Clara felt the weight of the situation hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to being vulnerable. She had always been in control, surrounded by the comforts of her wealth and her family's power. But now, everything was different. She was scared, scared of what was happening, scared for her life, and scared of her own helplessness. "What's happening?" she asked again, this time quieter, her voice barely above a whisper. John didn't answer right away. He was scanning the street ahead, checking for any signs of danger. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we need to stay hidden. Stay behind me." Clara nodded, swallowing hard. She tried to focus on John, tried to concentrate on his movements. The world around her seemed like it was spinning out of control. Every step felt like a risk, and every sound sent a jolt of panic through her body. They reached an old, dilapidated building. It had been abandoned for years, and its windows were shattered, its walls covered in grime and dirt. John pushed open a creaky door and led Clara inside. The interior was dark and musty, but it was quiet, quiet enough that they could hear the distant sounds of the firefight without being in immediate danger. John motioned for Clara to sit against a wall, then crouched down beside her. The two of them were now alone in the dark, the chaos of the outside world muffled by the thick walls of the building. Clara could feel her heart still racing, and she wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to hold herself together. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I don't know how you can stay so calm." John glanced at her, his face unreadable. "You get used to it," he said simply. "You have no choice. When you're out there," he gestured vaguely to the outside world, "you either survive or you don't. And if you want to survive, you have to stay calm." Clara nodded, but she didn't feel calm. She felt like she was caught in the middle of something she couldn't understand. Her world, the world she had always known, was being ripped apart before her eyes, and she had no idea what to do. "I'm sorry," she said, looking at him with a sincerity that surprised her. "I was wrong about you." John didn't respond immediately. He simply stared ahead, his eyes distant, as though his mind was already back on the battlefield. He had learned long ago that words didn't always matter in situations like this. Action did. Another explosion shook the building, rattling the windows and making the floor beneath them tremble. Clara gasped, instinctively reaching out for John's arm. "What's happening? Are we safe here?" "We'll be safe for now," John said, his voice low. "But we can't stay here for long. This place will be a target soon enough. The best we can do is wait until the fighting dies down, and then we can move." Clara didn't speak. She couldn't. What was there to say? She had no experience in this world, no understanding of what was really happening. All she had now was the man who had saved her life, the man she had once belittled and thought of as beneath her. And now, here she was, in his care, unable to do anything but follow him, and hope that he could guide her through this nightmare. Outside, the chaos continued. Gunfire echoed through the streets, and the occasional explosion sent tremors through the building. Clara's mind raced. She had always thought she was safe behind her wealth, her status, her privilege. But now, in the middle of a war zone, she realized how fragile that sense of safety had been. And as she sat there, in the dark, with John beside her, she couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for her to fully understand what he had been trying to tell her all along. What did it really mean to survive? What did it mean to be truly strong? The answer, she feared, would come soon enough. And when it did, it would change everything. The hours seemed to stretch on, the sounds of the distant firefight never quite fading, always in the background like an ever-present storm. The building they had taken refuge in felt like a sanctuary, but it was only temporary. Clara was restless, her thoughts racing as she sat on the cold, cracked floor, her mind struggling to process everything that had happened so far. Her world had turned upside down. The city she had known, with its bustling streets and posh cafes, had transformed into a war zone overnight. The chaos outside was like nothing she had ever imagined. And then there was John. This man she had once dismissed as weak, beneath her. He was the one who had pulled her to safety, who had been her protector in this unknown and dangerous world. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her eyes following John as he moved about the room, checking the windows, keeping an ear out for any signs of movement. He was methodical, precise in his actions, as though he had done this 100 times before. She couldn't help but watch him, still struggling to reconcile the man she had mocked with the one who was now her only lifeline. John had not said much since they had come into the building. He was focused, always watching, always listening. His calm demeanor in the face of such danger was something Clara found both comforting and unsettling. How could he remain so composed while the world around them was falling apart? How could he act so heroically when all she could do was sit in fear? Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you do it?" she asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "How do you stay so calm? How can you be so brave?" John didn't immediately respond. He was checking the ammunition in his bag, making sure everything was in order. But he could feel her eyes on him. He had known this question would come. It always did. People were always curious about bravery, about courage in the face of danger. But bravery wasn't something you could just explain. It was something you had to experience. He finished checking his gear and then turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. "It's not about being brave," he said quietly. "It's about doing what needs to be done. When you're in a situation like this, you don't think about fear. You don't have the luxury of fear. You just act." Clara frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. "But I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "How can you be so calm when everything is falling apart?" John sighed, his expression softening just slightly. He walked over to her and crouched down, meeting her gaze directly. "It's not about being fearless," he said. "Everyone feels fear. Everyone has moments when they want to run, to hide. But courage is doing what you need to do even when you're scared." Clara swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always thought of herself as strong. Her wealth, her status, those were her tools. But here, in this moment, all of that was meaningless. She was no different than anyone else in this war zone. She was just another person trying to survive. "John," she said after a pause, her voice more tentative now. I don't understand. I always thought people like you, people who live in poverty, didn't have the strength to survive things like this. I thought I was better." John's eyes softened, but there was no anger in them, no resentment. He understood. He had heard it all before. He had been judged for his entire life. dismissed because of his background, because of what people thought they knew about him. He knew Clara didn't mean to be cruel. She simply didn't understand. She had never known what it was like to be truly vulnerable, to have to rely on yourself when there was no one else to turn to. "You're not better than me, Clara," John said softly. "We're all just trying to survive. The difference is that some of us have had to learn how to survive from the very beginning. I didn't grow up with money, with luxury. I grew up with nothing, and I had to learn how to stand on my own, how to survive without anyone else to lean on. You, on the other hand, had everything handed to you. You were protected by your family's wealth, by your status. But that doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you more vulnerable." Clara looked down at her hands, the words cutting deeper than she had expected. She had always prided herself on her ability to control her life, to manipulate situations to her advantage. But now, in the midst of this chaos, her wealth meant nothing. It was just a mask, a fragile illusion of safety. In the face of real danger, she was just another person, just another soul trying to stay alive. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I was wrong to judge you." John didn't reply at first. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking for an apology. He wasn't angry at her. He had learned to forgive long ago, to let go of the past and focus on the present. In this world, there was no room for grudges, no time for bitterness. There was only survival. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Clara's heart jumped in her chest. The firefight outside was getting closer. John's eyes snapped toward the window, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. "They're here," he muttered, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move. Now." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Move? Where?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. John didn't waste time explaining. He stood quickly, motioning for Clara to follow him. "We're not staying here. It's not safe anymore." Clara stood, her legs shaking beneath her, and followed him as he moved swiftly through the building. The air seemed to thicken with tension, and the distant sounds of combat filled the silence between them. As they reached the back door, John stopped for a moment, glancing at Clara. "You stay close to me," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Do what I say, and we'll make it through this." Clara nodded, swallowing hard, though she could feel her heart racing in her chest. The reality of the situation had finally sunk in. This wasn't a game. There were no more illusions. The only thing that mattered now was survival. They moved quickly through the dark alleyways, John leading the way with unshakable confidence. Despite the noise, the chaos, and the danger, he remained focused. Clara, on the other hand, could hardly think. Her mind was racing, her body trembling, but she kept her eyes on John, trusting him completely. And as they moved further into the city, Clara couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the man who had saved her life, who had shown her what true courage really was. She had been wrong about him in every way. And now she was starting to understand. Bravery didn't come from wealth or status. It came from within. It came from knowing what you were willing to fight for. John's courage wasn't just in his actions. It was in his heart. And it was that courage that would carry them both through whatever came next. The streets were eerily quiet now, the chaos outside seemingly paused for a moment. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that it was only temporary. The tension was palpable, like the calm before a storm. She was following John closely as they navigated through the rubble of what used to be a lively part of the city. Every so often, they would stop and listen for the sounds of approaching danger. John, calm and composed as always, would scan the area, make a few quick decisions, and lead them to another safe spot. Clara, on the other hand, felt like she was in a constant state of alert, her senses heightened, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The moment they had stepped out of their temporary refuge, Clara had realized how much she had underestimated the gravity of the situation. She was no longer just a spectator in her own life. Now she was fighting to survive. It wasn't just the sounds of gunfire or the explosions that rattled her, though those were certainly terrifying. It was the realization that the world she had known was gone. There was no more comfort, no more certainty. And in the middle of all of this, John, the man she had once looked down upon, was now her only hope. They reached a new hideout, a small abandoned building at the edge of a demolished street. It was a perfect spot to lie low for a while. But Clara knew they couldn't stay for long. John had already scouted ahead and made sure the area was secure. He gestured for Clara to follow him inside. As they stepped into the darkened building, Clara noticed how different everything seemed now. She had always been surrounded by luxury, never having to worry about where she would sleep, what she would eat, or whether or not she would survive. But now, here she was, in a crumbling building, with nothing but her wits and John's guidance to keep her alive. The building was quiet, and Clara took a moment to sit down on a dusty chair in the corner. Her hands were shaking, but she tried to hide it. John sat down across from her, his eyes scanning the surroundings as he made sure they were safe. It was only then that Clara noticed the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, even as he remained calm and steady. She had never seen someone handle danger with such grace. It was as though John had been born for this, born to survive and protect others. Clara opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but the words didn't come. She had never been good at expressing gratitude, and the truth was, she felt like she didn't deserve to be saved. She had mocked him, belittled him, and treated him like he was nothing. And yet, he had put his life on the line to save her. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, her voice small. It was a question she had been meaning to ask ever since he had dragged her out of the firefight. "I don't deserve it. I treated you horribly." John turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Clara felt like she was being judged, like her actions were being weighed and found wanting. But then slowly he spoke, his voice quiet and steady. "You don't have to deserve anything," John said. "People need help sometimes, and I help because it's what I can do. I didn't save you because of what you did or didn't do to me. I saved you because in this moment, you needed saving. And that's what matters." Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. His words were so simple, yet so profound. She had always believed that people only helped others because they wanted something in return, because they wanted to feel good about themselves, or because they expected something in exchange. But John's words didn't make sense in that context. He wasn't doing this for himself. He was doing it because, in the middle of a life and death situation, it was the right thing to do. "I was wrong about you," Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I never understood what it meant to be strong. I thought strength was about money, about power. But you're the strongest person I've ever met." John didn't respond immediately. He just sat there for a moment, letting her words sink in. Finally, he spoke. "Strength doesn't come from what you have, Clara," he said. "It comes from what you do. It comes from who you are when everything falls apart. When the world's against you, when you're scared, and you still keep going. That's where real strength comes from." Clara nodded, her mind racing. It was as though a veil had been lifted from her eyes. All her life, she had equated strength with wealth, with status, with having control over her environment. But now, sitting here with John, she realized how shallow and meaningless that belief had been. True strength wasn't about what you could buy or who you could manipulate. It was about the choices you made, even when things were at their worst. "How do you do it?" Clara asked, her voice quiet. "How do you keep going, even when it feels like the whole world is falling apart?" John looked at her, his gaze steady. "Because I have to," he said simply. "You keep going because you have no other choice. You keep going because there's always someone who needs you, even if you don't realize it. And you don't stop because stopping means giving up. And giving up isn't an option." Clara swallowed hard, feeling something stir inside her. It was a mixture of awe and admiration, but also something deeper, a sense of humility that she had never felt before. Here she was, a woman who had always been in control of her life, surrounded by everything she thought she needed, and yet it was John, a man she had once dismissed as weak, who had taught her what true strength really was. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt truly humbled. She had spent so many years believing that she was superior to others, believing that wealth and power made her better. But in this moment, she realized how wrong she had been. John had shown her that the true measure of a person wasn't in how much they had, but in how much they were willing to give, how much they were willing to endure for the sake of others. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt truly humbled. She had spent so many years believing that she was superior to others, believing that wealth and power made her better. But in this moment, she realized how wrong she had been. John had shown her that the true measure of a person wasn't in how much they had, but in how much they were willing to give, how much they were willing to endure for the sake of others. As the minutes passed, the noise from the outside world seemed to grow quieter, the chaos settling into an uneasy stillness. Clara felt a sense of peace that she had never experienced before. She had been in the presence of true strength, and it had changed her. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "For saving me, for showing me what it means to be strong." John simply nodded, his expression softening. "It's what anyone would do," he said, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. But Clara knew better. What John had done was not simple, it was extraordinary, and it had changed her life in ways she could never fully explain. She had come into this world thinking she had all the answers, thinking that her wealth and status would protect her, but now she understood that true protection came from within, from the strength of character, from the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. And as the day drew to a close, and the sounds of the firefight outside slowly began to fade into the background, Clara realized that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning. She was learning that survival wasn't about how much you had. It was about how much you were willing to give. It was about the strength you carried inside you, even when everything around you was falling apart. In that moment, Clara knew that she would never be the same again. She had learned a life-changing lesson, one that had come from the most unlikely of saviors. And for that, she would be forever grateful.